We have another amazing guest lined up, Ms. Samantha Snabes. She's an officer in the Air National Guard and the CEO for RE3D, where she facilitates connections between others printing at the human scale and or using recycled materials to access locally driven manufacturing in 53 different countries. She has a ton of experience in entrepreneurship, and before starting her own business, she actually worked at NASA at the HQ as an entrepreneur in residence and a deputy strategist supporting the NASA Johnson Space Center Space Life Sciences Directorate. So I'd say a lot of really awesome insight. She has worked with entrepreneurs globally, and we're really excited to have her. Thank you for coming on, allowing us to ask you some questions. So the first thing I really want to get started with is, why a 3D printing company? Why RE3D? What inspired you to start your own business? What need did you see that should be addressed?
Sure. So I would say I'm an accidental entrepreneur. That seems to be the themes in the companies I've started. And basically what had happened is my whole life I wanted to be an astronaut. And after selling my first company, some of my peers at NASA had invited me very kindly to join their team as working with some of the innovation themes. And for those of you in high school, how I got that job was when I was in college, I wrote an experiment that got rejected for NASA to fly an Obama comet. And the program was really kind and gave me some good feedback, and I was able to reapply and eventually fly. And then through that, when I got to fly in the Obama comet, I met people that worked for NASA, and we stayed in touch. So after I sold my first company, they offered me a job. So you never know where those early college experiences might take you. And so I would just say, if you're really interested in working for a certain organization, always take those extracurricular activities to build your network. So when I got to NASA, just after the recession and right before the shuttle program was canceled, which was really sad for a lot of people working there. And I think that's important to know, because there were a lot of people at that time who were getting laid off or were thinking about what the space program would look like or what they would do without the shuttle program, because it was such a big part of our identity. And we knew at that time in 2009 that it would be years before Americans would be supporting launching from space from the US, even with the commercial space endeavors that were just getting started. So I would say I was part of this cohort that was always just sitting around and talking about like what the future would look like, and how living and working in space and the things we were excited about, like say access to clean water or air or solar energy or battery powered technologies, how that experience translated to more remote environments. When I first got to NASA, I was really involved with two organizations. I've always volunteered a lot. And one was called Opportunity International, that does microfinance, micro-lending for small businesses overseas primarily. And then the other one was Engineers Without Borders, NASA Johnson Space Center. So I'm not an engineer, but I really liked this idea of, again, using those insights that astronauts and NASA engineers had to try to solve problems for others. And they were really kind and let me participate with them. And that experience, I had the opportunity to travel to Rwanda and Nicaragua specifically, and then we supported some work in Uganda and in Mexico. And, you know, I'd always volunteered a lot. I hadn't traveled a lot, but I was surprised when we were in Rwanda, specifically Muganero, where a lot of the genocide took place 20 years ago. And I was surprised to learn that, you know, despite all our hard work to make technologies and to bring it in and to deal with, you know, export issues or importation issues and, you know, just the logistics, that not everyone there was really excited about outside aid and support, because, and I see this in the military as well, you know, I think a lot of people really want to support their family and their economy independently, and just might not have the tools to do that. Right. We also saw there was high unemployment. There was a lot of plastic waste that was more visible. What we've learned since then is the amount of plastic waste that's laying around is the same if you're in Rwanda or you're really in the US. It's just, you know, we aggregate it more in landfills. But more importantly, the people we met were really brilliant. So around that time, I had used a 3D printer in my previous job on the industrial side, which was really expensive. We'd seen them, we seen them at NASA, but the open source movement was starting, the maker movement. And my now co-founder, Matthew, had one of the first, who was a NASA engineer, desktop open source printers, and he was really excited about it. And one of my first jobs was in a factory in Detroit. My family's done that. My last company was hardware based, and we were like, it didn't take, again, I didn't think I was an entrepreneur, even though I'm in this entrepreneurship role at NASA, but my co-founder was like, Samantha, like, this is the future, like, this could change society. And like, the light bulb went off. And so the next thing I know, I ended up bringing in some of those themes into NASA and was keeping a blog for NASA, and became ultimately a social entrepreneur in residence for NASA headquarters. And I was talking about this opportunity of like, having access and distributed tools and manufacturing and economic independence. And ultimately, we started meeting in the conference room at Johnson Space Center, and we were kind of like a sub-project of Engineers Without Borders. And then it was kind of like a spin-off of a group of friends that I was talking to that were like-minded in the space agency. And the writing was on the wall for all of our peers. Like, we went, you'll notice our URL is re3d.org. We just started talking about the need for people to innovate independently and to use 3D printing. And what we learned is that things that people wanted to make are bigger than a desktop model. There were limb prosthetics and tools and the birthing stools or composting toilets. And we say, those are things at the human scale. But the printers that could provide that were super expensive or took a lot of power, or couldn't be easily transported. So we started sharing this need, and we really just thought it'd be an open source project for what we called a toilet-sized 3D printer that could eventually be powered by trash. And we felt like it had a cost under $10,000 because a lot of the purchasing thresholds are around 10K. So we started to share that online, and we got a following, and then we entered a competition with Jack Daniels and Unstructables, which somehow would combine forces that year for what they called an independence project.
It's an interesting partnership.
Yeah. And the prize was like a whiskey barrel and like $25,000 to help create independence for others. Thankfully, we didn't win because it turns out we need a lot more money than that. But we all were fighting over the whiskey barrel if we were going to win it. But what it did is it really galvanized our team. We started meeting every week and keeping notes, and kept it going even when I went off to officer school and came back. And then ultimately, the package we had made for the Jack Daniels Independence Project was repurposed for this program called Startup Chile, which gives you $40K to start an idea or to launch a product in Latin America. And so when that happened, then suddenly this kind of nonprofit, group of friends who were just trying to like share what we thought was a good idea became a business overnight.
Gotcha. So it's funny you say you didn't see yourself as an entrepreneur. It seems like across, even before you got to NASA, you were an entrepreneur, you already started your own businesses. When did you know like entrepreneurship is something I wanted to pursue? Was like as a kid with a lemonade stand, or, where did that passion kind of begin of entrepreneurship is what I wanted to pursue?
I've always had side hustles. But again, I always just thought it was problem solving. So as an early child, the first business I remember doing was I would get the lunch money from my friends in exchange for pulling their teeth out. And so I would pull out their teeth. They had a really loose one they couldn't eat anyway, so I'd get like their milk money or their lunch money, and then everybody won. And then I remember the proposition when I would work on my pitch was, when you lose your tooth, you'll get money from the tooth fairy. So like everyone had enough side. Yeah, and then I gave, I worked at horse stables and gave lessons, and then saved up and got a pair of dog clippers, and then started trimming dogs for dogs in my neighborhood and high school. Later on, I worked in a factory for a couple years, but just kind of always had these side ventures. Again, for me, I always had a goal. I was saving up for college application fees or the ACT or to get a car or to go to space camp. There's just always some motivator, and it was just my path of getting there. And then I ran I guess it would be like kind of an illegal gambling ring in college. And that was the first time I had employees.
So did you think, when you were running this illegal gambling ring in college, like, because you probably had offers to go work for a ton of different companies and big corporate organizations, is that what you would start to lean towards while you were in college? Because a lot of your peers might be following those tracks, or, what was kind of that mindset when it was getting time to worry about what your full-time job was going to look like after you graduated school?
So I was an undergrad for a really long time because I had a
Mhm.
hard time supporting myself financially, but uh and just took a longer route. But for me, I always wanted to be an astronaut. So everything I did was around this desire to be an astronaut. So that's why I went to space camp. That's why, I chose to have a scientific degree as an
Mhm.
undergrad. That's why I wrote that experiment for NASA. And then I had to stay in college a little bit longer
Mhm.
to be able to fly it because the stipulation was you still had to be a senior by the time you flew.
Mhm.
So everything was just kind of predicated around that. When I was in college, to be an astronaut, I heard you needed research experience, and I learned that too late to be eligible for the research programs at my school. So I got a job working at a startup, and I was on a project that inevitably I was able to have a more active role in, and
Right.
it got government funding to continue. And at the end of that government funding, we were given the opportunity to commercialize it. So I accidentally started a company or helped co-found a company when I was in college.
Mhm.
And so when I graduated, I was already launching a life science company. I
Gotcha.
didn't know anything.
Uh-huh.
So again, it wasn't like something I chose. It just kind of, I
Happened.
was solving a problem that we need an artificial immune system for the army.
Gotcha. I mean, I think everyone at some stage in their life wanted to be an astronaut. You know what I mean? I think if you go back to the 60s,
Yeah.
they landed on the moon. Really, like kids always have wanted to be an astronaut. So, what is that actually like? Being at the NASA headquarters and stuff like that with the people who put man on the moon. What was that like working there and stuff? I can't imagine it wasn't just amazing. But
Yeah, it was a pretty emotional experience. I think both starting when I was at Johnson and then when I left, and then getting to support some of the headquarters
right.
efforts. I think, yeah, again, because NASA, now we're seeing commercial space efforts, but NASA then with the pause of the space program or shuttle program was going to be a very different organization.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Um, so there was just so many people leaving, and there are many people in our peer group that went on to create amazing ventures that are much more successful than Re3D. So there was just a lot of discussion, I think, around. I remember in our peer group where some people started other ventures. It was always around like how we felt like we were all explorers at heart and problem solvers, and so there was just kind of this movement,
Huh.
community of people that were like, okay, if we're not going to go into space, what can we do with our time and talent?
Gotcha. I think it's very fitting that you have the constellation wall background.
Yeah.
That like just really sets the mood for the NASA. So what nowadays, as you're CEO of a company, when did that really start for you, and what was it like really beginning your business in the first couple stages? You said you had friends at NASA you could bounce this idea off with and you started with. So what was that like, that early stage process of beginning your own company and stuff?
Yeah, so initially we were just meeting as like an extra meeting through Engineers Without Borders. And then Engineers Without Borders is like, this really doesn't follow our model. So we called it EWB Black Ops. And then it just became this, and at some point, probably because I'd had other adventures and had started multiple other initiatives over the
Right.
years, I started like keeping notes, like Robert's Rule of Order, and regularly scheduling meetings. At one point, I got everyone together in like a restaurant in Austin. I remember I gave them all binders with like stuff in it. So I didn't see it as a company formation. I was just, trying to stay organized. And I think so around that time, kind of an interesting like parallel path was I was commissioning as an officer. At the time, I thought I was going to be a pilot. I'm not now, but I knew what that time commitment was going to be, and I wanted to make sure this continued. So I just kind of naturally took point on like corralling everyone, and it was like multiple peer groups. And then over probably the course of 9 months, like the people that really saw themselves committing time to it kind of settled out. And then when we got the money from Startup Chile, it was $40,000 to make this thing happen.
Yeah.
The real kick in the pants though is, okay, so I'll shoot back up. When we found that out, it was December of 2012. New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, 2012, 2013, we all got into a room. University of Texas actually offered us some space through one of our co-founders, Suzanne Pierce, and we said, okay, are we going to print from trash first or make a big printer? Because my co-founder very quickly realized that who's still working. He would work at NASA until June of the following year. He was like, guys, like this is, you know, you need to eat the elephant one bite at a time. So let's make the toilet size 3D printer under 10K first, and then we'll work on printing from waste. So that was the first big decision we took. And then we also decided to become an LLC. We were an LLC for about 6 months. And so we filed the formation docs, and literally like within 2 weeks, I was on a plane in Chile with an idea in my head, like selling the concept of Re3D without a product. So when we got lucky, and where the company really became, at that point too, we still didn't know if we'd be a for-profit or a nonprofit after the program. But what sealed the deal for us is we get to Startup Chile, and in the intro week, they mentioned that they were going to have a booth at South by Southwest. Now we're a Texas-based company, and I'm a hustler, and I didn't consider myself an entrepreneur. But the light bulb goes off in my head, and I was like, hey, if my co-founder in 8 weeks can actually make a toilet-sized 3D printer under 10K, I'm going to launch it on Kickstarter. And a lot of our friends from NASA and in the innovation community were doing that at the time, and almost every 3D printing company was. I'm like, I want to launch it on Kickstarter the day that South by Southwest starts.
Wow.
And Matthew, like, bless his soul, made it happen. So there were 6 of us initially at that point, still like kind of working this idea for what would be 3D. And the 5 of them got the printer Matthew made in his living room to Austin, set a booth, which that year was huge. Right in front of the doors, there was a live band playing. And as the doors opened, what we didn't know was the CEO of the biggest 3D printing company at the time, or the most popular one, so that gets done. The press gets to come in first in the hall. And so the press comes in, and it's TechCrunch, and this guy who, to this day, I owe him a beer, says 3D printing has just gotten bigger than a bread box. We were funded in 27 hours, and we had $250,000 at the end of that campaign. Wow. And we were instantly in 20 plus countries. So now we're talking about running a factory, which thankfully Matthew and I had experience in, my co-founder. But that took us, at that point, we were no longer going to be a nonprofit. Right. And we were still, we had a commitment over the next year to build a company, to build the infrastructure, and to deliver on these huge printers, which, you know, take up a lot of space. So I would say, you know, 8 weeks after when we started in March, we realized, like, okay, this is really happening. We need to figure out.
That's an amazing turnaround in 8 weeks. That's crazy.
Yeah. And then it would take us almost a year, you know, to deliver all of them around the world, and to learn how to export in all these countries, and to have our first, you know, shop, and to do inventory and versioning and instructions and all the stuff we didn't think about up front.
Yeah. So to provide like a simple just example of what 3D printing is, because probably people have a conception of it, but they don't really understand what it is. Could you maybe go into detail on what actually 3D printing is and what you guys really do? Because you're part of 53 different countries now, you said, right? So maybe kind of talk about what your operations are like, what your day-to-day is like, and so on.
Sure. So 3D printing is really just a way of like putting 2 things together to make something else. So if I take a bottle of whipped cream, or what's it called? Cheez-It or whatever? No, those are the crackers, right?
Yeah, those are the crackers.
the cheese that comes in the can.
Cheese whip or something.
I just blanked. Yeah. But if I just like make a poop emoji, that's technically 3D printing, right? Because I'm just like stacking things up. And in essence, that's what we do. So there's a lot of different types of 3D printers. Some of the ones that are really cool at UT that were invented there are like taking, it looks like little pieces of dust, and like,
yes,
you know, pushing them together through like a laser or another means, sticking them together to make something. Typically 3D printing is nice because it has less waste, because you're only making exactly what you need. Well, we can get into the weeds later, actually. There's support materials sometimes and stuff, but whatever.
Right.
And the concept is that you know, you have less waste, and maybe you can make forms that with traditional manufacturing, like a mold, you couldn't do. And then finally, there's sometimes the ability to make things on demand. So that's kind of why people are interested in it. There are so many types of printers out there. The kind that we do is like a hot glue gun. So it's kind of like making that poop emoji with, you know, whipped cream.
Right.
It's just drawing an object layer by layer with plastic that's getting heated up, and it cools really fast. So you can make an object that is basically like stacked pancakes, right? So that's what we do. What makes us unique is we make the world's biggest affordable. I'm not supposed to say cheap anymore, because they're not, like, they're good quality. The world's biggest cheap one, cost per scale. And then recently we won a bunch of awards that enabled us to, and some grants, to take the printers that we're selling all over that normally take like a rope-like material they heat up to make the object,
Right.
Instead, it can take shredded up garbage and melt that directly. So that's what makes us kind of unique right now,
Hmm.
because we're really focused on this garbage thing.
Hmm. And have you, I mean, how has your role changed in wake of a pandemic like this? Is it just totally different? Obviously, do you guys have a big office that you used to go to and that doesn't happen anymore? Or what does that look like for y'all?
So we are called, and for people in high school thinking about jobs or manufacturing,
Hmm.
we're what's called an essential business. And what that means is we make stuff that is so needed. The government said we don't want you to shut down.
Hmm.
Because we're an essential business, we're still open now. It gets pretty complicated with the pandemic because we want our team to be safe. So now we run these crazy shifts, basically 24/7 and over the weekends, just spread out more in the factory. I have a rule where only one person can use a toilet at a time. We only have 4 toilets,
Gotcha.
and kind of stagger that way. And then
Uh-huh.
as many people on the team, like engineers, customer support, sales, 2D, 3D design,
Hmm.
they're working from home.
Hmm.
And then, and so I'm actually working from home more. I used to be the person that was traveling the most on the team, but there's not a lot of travel right now. So, which is good because we're actually busier than we've ever been because we have to think about, to your point, not how we do things normally, but if there is a recession and it looks like we're entering one, what
Right.
if some of these companies can't afford to buy the printers? And we also offer services around it, like contract printing or design. So if you don't know how to do 3D printing, you can pay us to do it for you. We have to figure out how we're going to do that in the new normal that everyone keeps talking about. So we've already started writing a bunch of grants and sharing ideas. We've had that for maybe some vehicles that could fund research if the sales side gets a little bit slow. So I've been really busy with grant writing right now. And then the other thing that people maybe have heard of our company doing or similar companies is we're actually making what they call PPE, so protective equipment.
Right.
Doing it for hospitals, but now we're working with like firefighters and police and sanitation workers and fast food workers
That's awesome.
and maybe communities that would have a harder time getting that right now.
Mhm.
So we're doing a lot of that, and then also applying for grants to do more of that.
Awesome. That's actually amazing. So just from an entrepreneurial perspective, what skill do you see as being like the skill that every entrepreneur needs to have? Because we mentioned, how important the hustle is. Do you see it just being that side of you that's always looking for the next opportunity, the next thing you can do, or what do you see? Is it a tangible skill, or is it more of just that, kind of dog that someone has in them?
Yeah. So we mentor a lot of companies too because we are a social enterprise, and our goal, like a lot of our customers, will start their own businesses.
Mhm.
And I think what I see, because everyone always likes to talk about like the failure rate of startups, is the ones that stay alive really are okay with working all the time. And like you'll hear this sometimes, like people from the bigger companies, like there's a podcast I like to listen to called How I Built This. They always talk about how like
That's
they
great.
work more for their own company, but they're working for themselves than anything else they've ever done. And I think some people are okay with that in the short term, but when you start, like this is our 7th year in Re3D, when you start to think about, like for us, a group of people that was like in their 20s to 40s, like going through significant life changes, taking care of
Right.
family members, starting families, getting married, like you're committing to this for the long haul with people you are not married to.
Mhm.
So I think one, it's work. And then I think the other thing that has served us well that I encourage other entrepreneurs to do is to really build a culture around failure and to
Mhm.
be throwing your product and your service and your idea out early. People are always worried about, I think, someone taking their idea, their idea.
Mhm.
But the reality of it is, usually when you get your idea out there, it changes a little bit when you start to get
Right.
feedback. So really, like just starting, because every time you start to document and to share, you kind of get better and better at learning about what people want and what you can do
Definitely.
and how you can improve.
Definitely. Do you see, in wake of this of coronavirus, how does this change the entrepreneurship game? I think there's going to be plenty of people said tons of companies are going to come out of this, delivering a new service, but tons are obviously not going to be able to come out of this. What is your opinion on that?
I do think that'll happen. I think there was a trend for a while, especially if the venture-backed ones, to really build out software offerings.
Mhm.
And sometimes you can do that with like maybe less money up front than like a
Mhm.
factory like we did.
Right.
Um, what's really interesting is I think with all of the concerns around even having access to the supplies that doctors need,
Hmm.
because everyone in the world needs the same things at the same time,
Right.
and not all that stuff is made locally.
Hmm.
I'm optimistic, and there's a lot of conversations now around like, what is it going to take? Because it costs more money to run a business that does manufacturing in the U.S. And
Hmm.
there's fewer people that know how to use the equipment that you need, because that's just not as a popular of a choice. People would rather be an accountant than, machining things out of metal all day, or
Right.
in a printer. So I'm excited because I think there's going to be a lot of businesses around like, okay, oh, and by the way, you can't even go to school in person anymore. So how are you
Exactly.
going to learn these skill sets? So I think we're about to see a breakout in startups and helping and new technologies for distributed learning, and
Hmm.
for learning, things you have to do with your hands, which I think is really cool. And then I think you're going to see a lot of manufacturing companies. Like there's so many things that, we all have coronavirus stories of something that we couldn't get that we normally
Right.
would.
Exactly.
Um, I think I think there's a lot of opportunity for improvement in terms of shipping and just the logistics
Mhm.
around physical products. So
Right.
I'm really excited to see where that goes.
Right. And so then for, your own company and your own trade, how do you see 3D printing, just not necessarily coronavirus related, but just the next, you guys have set the company for 7 years, you said. So over the next 3 or 4 years, what changes do you think are going to start happening?
So for us, we're focused on this garbage thing, but it's really what we call a pellet printer. So you can print with pellets, which is the raw material people use to make almost anything made out of plastic anyway,
Mhm.
and or shredded garbage. So I think in 3D printing, that's starting. We're not the only person now, like getting more vocal about that. So I think you're going to see a shift because people with 3D printing, they've kind of gone beyond the hobbyist. The first movers were hobbyists, I think, in more of the public knowledge. And now people are saying, what can I make that I can use?
Mhm.
And how can I make it more functional or more durable?
Mhm.
So that's kind of gotten us more into the industrial conversation. And there's more and more companies like ours that are trying to make that affordable. So I
Mhm.
think we're going to continue to see innovations around making printers more user friendly, that can make objects that will last a long time, that you need, that are bigger. And because of that, our style of 3D printing, I think, is at the affordable price point, there's going to be multiple companies, I think, doing what we're doing. For
Yeah.
V3D, I think we're only a little bigger. So we're starting to get approached by shipbuilders and the construction industry and all these new markets that are willing to, change maybe the standards around how they used to do things and the policy. So that for us is really exciting. For
Mhm.
our company in particular, with where we are, we're really interested in those communities that have supply chains that have been disrupted.
Mhm.
And that's part of the reason why we have a presence in Puerto Rico. So
Right.
we want to, using Puerto Rico as an example, and neighboring island nations and other island nations that have purchased our product,
Mhm.
one to the Philippines on Friday.
Mhm.
We want to really look at communities where maybe their landfills are overflowing. There's a lot of plastic waste. There's a
Gotcha.
huge desire to be greener and more sustainable and to create jobs. So you'll probably see us focusing on like pilot projects and initiatives around that in factories.
So you think there's just going to be really another new wave of 3D printing in the future as well? Like there's going to, like, we've already changed so much in how we do things. It's going to be another, transition.
Yeah, you have the opportunity now to, have a 3D printer near a local Starbucks that's
Yeah.
taking all of the plastic lids from your cups to make park benches or
Wow.
furniture that the school needs in your community. You have the opportunity. Big factories produce a lot of plastic waste,
Mhm.
whether it's the saran wrap around the pallets or just in their processes. They could take that to make their own pallets. So they don't have to be out of wood and they don't have to source them. So I
Gotcha.
think we're going to see all these new variations of like closed loop economies. And that's where we are kind of leaning towards.
So then, looking at it from your company since it's grown, you guys went from a pretty small, like close knit group of friends. How have you grown it team wise? And since you've been the CEO, how has that hiring process worked as you've
Mhm.
gone on the last past 7 years? I know that's a complicated issue for a lot of startups.
Yeah, I would say I have yet to meet a mentor that says they do hiring well, which is disappointing. But everyone always just talks about what they did wrong,
Hmm.
and we're definitely in the same boat. We could do it a lot better. We're pretty bad at hiring and the onboarding process, and
Hmm.
most of our interns would say that too. That being said, we're hiring right now. If you want to join our team,
There you go,
just give us
everybody.
and feedback. But yeah, I would say we're learning to hire really slowly.
Hmm.
Um, Internships have been a great way for us to figure out if someone's a good fit. And then for more experienced hires, one thing that we've started to lean towards is doing like test projects in the beginning, or maybe you're a contractor for a while, and then if you both agree it's really awesome, then you become a full hire, we're
Mhm.
still trying to decide like where you draw the line. Are you in the team WhatsApp if you're a contractor or not? Or
Yeah.
do you get a email? So, and I'm learning those things are really important. So it's clear and transparent as to like how somebody integrates within a company. And that's
Right.
actually something we're trying to prioritize right now during the pandemic. Like some of that day one stuff we wish we'd always had.
Mhm.
So, from day one, the new hires who don't have all the 7 years worth of history in the company
Right.
really understand how things work.
Mhm. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but how do you think, entrepreneurship culture and working for a startup is different than, big company culture as well? Or what are the differences you've seen from your experience working at?
Yeah, I would say people say, and I hope this is true of our company, that you're maybe a little bit more flexible or responsive if you're a smaller company versus a big company that has multiple departments where something has to be communicated or multiple people to discuss something.
Right.
Um, I There's a theory floating right now, especially for manufacturing, that the small manufacturers like us will do better.
Mhm.
And we've already been able to take on customers that normally by customers who
Mhm.
can't because they just couldn't respond fast enough, even with the legal documents where we could. I think I would say we're more flexible. Like we're able to pivot to making PPE faster than the bigger companies could. And then I would say the downside, and we've had people leave our company even in the last year over this that hired in. That we were both parties are really excited. Is that in a startup, really in a small business, you may have one thing that's your job, but there's also lots of little things you have to do all the time
Right.
to either support the culture or just be yourselves in positions where you have to collaborate sometimes on a problem. And if you really just like doing one thing and one thing well, sometimes being in a small business isn't a good fit because you're always going to feel like you're getting pulled away.
Very
And the
wise.
people that are better at multitasking, I think, and kind of like breaking things up and having multiple things that have to be done at the same time, tend to do better in the startup environment or
Right.
small business environment.
Yeah. Startups is one of those things we could probably sit here and talk for 10 hours about what it's like starting your own, running your company, but I don't want to take up, this is my final question, so I don't take too much.
No
If you could look
worries.
back on all your years of experience, starting your own company, working for NASA, and give a line of advice to yourself at 18 years old or an 18-year-old entrepreneur, what would be that token sentence of, this is all that I've gleaned from my past?
Yeah, I'll cite a military experience. So I became the bottom of the totem pole of the officer, and when I was actually 29 and 30, and
Mhm.
I was working what we call an exercise in the military, and there was an admiral there from the Navy, so he was like way high up, and the big guys sometimes like to find the junior officer to give advice.
Right.
And this guy came into the exercise and he was in charge of it, but it really had nothing to do with anything he'd spent his whole career working on. So he was asking like questions sometimes that even I knew the answer to, or like really basic questions. And I watched him do this for a day, and then he pulled me aside and he said, "Lieutenant," he said, "can I give you some words of wisdom?" And I've
Some
really stuck to this.
unsolicited advice.
He goes, "You can be stupid for a day or you can be stupid for the rest of your life." And he's like, "I heard you're starting a company as well." And he said, "I implore you to ask as many questions as you can every day, because every day is an opportunity to learn from someone else
Mhm.
and to, to get that experience and that insight that you're missing." So that's something I really took to heart. It's one of like the few things I've always remembered is like, okay, I'd rather just be stupid today. So every day I'm like, okay, what questions do I need to have? So I don't
Right.
to put something in a forum or to ask somebody a question or for help. And 9 times out of 10 too, people really do want to help you. So that served us well being an open source community, is to participate in a lot of different accelerators, to have a lot of mentors, and to always be asking our
Yeah.
customers how we can do better.
I think that's a great line. And, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it. We're going to make sure to link your company website, everything like that, social media on there. To all our listeners, I hope you guys got some from this. We could probably spend the next day talking about entrepreneurship and everything in between. Thank you once again, everybody. Tune in next time. Follow us on our social media at The Ride Along. Have a good one.